If I Could Tell You Just One Thing is a brand new event industry podcast presented by me, Mel Noakes.
And me, Max Fellows.
It's a podcast from Elevate where industry leaders write a letter to their younger self.
And consider what wise advice they would give themselves now if only they could.
Our discussion is all based on this letter.
Be prepared for refreshingly honest conversation and wise words of wisdom.
Our guest on this episode is Seán Doyle. Seán has worked in the events industry for 20 years with a career path that includes working agency side with some of the world's biggest brands, including Instagram, Facebook and PlayStation.
Seán is currently Director of Experiential Marketing at Pinterest, leading a global team with responsibility for brand experiences across advertising, creator and consumer experiences. Seán believes that life is an adventure to follow your dreams and make it fun wherever you can. And if you're not having fun, it's time to choose a new adventure. Hi, Seán, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the podcast. Long time listener, first time caller. Really excited to be here. I'm Seán. I am Director of Experiential Marketing at Pinterest, like you said. Pinterest, as I'm sure many of your listeners in the event industry will know, is the world's inspiration app. It's a place for people to find billions of the world's best ideas and plan their dreams into reality, essentially. So joined Pinterest nearly 4 years ago now as a event marketing lead for Europe as the business was starting to scale outside of the US. And now I am leading a global team across UK, Ireland and the US. And yeah, prior to that, I had a long time in agencies. That's obviously Max. You all know we had a couple of great years there together, which I'm sure we'll touch on. And yeah, that's me. What else do you want to know?
So Seán, we cannot wait to dig into all of this. There's so much to talk about. I guess the first question is, how did you find writing that letter to yourself? It's quite an experience to go back 20 years.
It definitely is, yeah. Can I ask, do either of you watch RuPaul's Drag Race?
Yes.
Okay. I have. Well, Pete has been recommending it at some time, but I've watched a bit.
Okay.
Why?
I just wondered if there was like any inspiration there, because the final episode of Drag Race, basically, RuPaul asks the finalist queens to like talk to a picture of themselves as a child, and it's like the most emotive thing. I'm always like in tears.
Okay.
So, so I was kind of like, that reminded me of that when I did it. And I was like, great, I'm never going to go on Drag Race, but I haven't.
Hang on, we now want to know where the inspiration originally came from. I thought it was a great idea from us, but Pete had seeded it from Drag Race.
100%. How was the experience? It was therapeutic, I will say. I'm going to say eventually I enjoyed it. I probably procrastinated on it for quite a long time. I was like, do I really want to say all about these things about myself? Like, talk to myself at that stage. But I found it really interesting. Like, that time going back specifically 20 years in my life, like 18, when I was 18 years old, was like a really pivotal moment for me. And it actually was the moment that I kind of accidentally fell into the event industry. So I was very unsure of myself, I suppose. I really didn't have a big plan. I didn't even know what experiential marketing was, I suppose. So yeah, it was fascinating. And actually, I kind of came away from it thinking, I wish I had spent more time looking back and more regularly. There was like a lot of moments that I just was really proud of. And it also just reminded me a lot of moments, a lot of people, reminding me to reach out to people who I hadn't spoken to in ages. So yeah, it was really actually quite an enjoyable experience in the end. Amazing.
That's really good to hear. And I think that it's only when that reflection back as you realise just quite how far you've come, and that journey has been, well, a lot of it very different to what you'd once thought about, but you know, what an incredible journey in itself. So just going then back to prior to that 18, 19 years then, and just as a bit of, I suppose, precursor to the incredible career that's then kind of ensued, what was Seán like kind of growing up, and what was kind of family and schooling like for you?
Yeah, so it's a pretty normal kid, I think. I grew up just outside Reading in a very fascinating town called Bracknell, famous for its outdoor fake ski slope and its amazing Coral Reef Water Park, which was the best place for birthday parties ever. I went to school in Reading. I guess what was I like at school? I mean, I was into maths, business studies, etc. Making myself sound like a real geek, but I didn't think I was. I kind of turned into a bit of a kind of goth/punk in my teenage years. I got suspended from school for dyeing my hair blue.
I love that you were a rebel even as a kid.
This expressive age, I think, like the teenage years. But yeah, my family were publicans, actually. And obviously, I've listened to SJ's episode recently, and I know that she had a kind of similar upbringing with her parents. They're Irish family. They were kind of like the typical Irish landlord and landlady of pubs, really. And they ran pubs in the southeast of England before and after I was born. Then they took a bit of a break whilst I was at school, trying to aim towards a bit more of a work-life balance, I think, which I'm not sure they ever really achieved. They were both kind of obsessed with work, really. And my dad had started a plumbing business. My mum was running these service stations for Shell. And then when I was 17, we decided to move back to Ireland. And really that was like to follow my dad's dream of moving back home, I suppose. And they bought this village pub, this kind of derelict building. It wasn't just the village pub, it was also the village shop, the petrol station, the post office, and it was in the village that my mum had grown up in, and that was a real adventure. So the three of us packed up and moved there. We spent 4 months, I guess, working like day and night to refurb this building, including the home we were living in, and you know, the villagers, the family, everyone kind of like chipped in to build this business, from like carving this bespoke bar to laying this like floor with local tiles, etc. It was really an adventure. And then I probably spent another 6 months there as the business opened, working there full time, like getting that off the ground. And then, yeah, I moved back to the UK when I was 18, which brings us to around about the letter time, I suppose.
And when kind of in that hospitality environment, the kind of Republican, how did that shape you, I suppose, as an individual? One would think almost because you've got people in around you all the time as to really kind of carve out a social side and almost kind of interpersonal skills developed there. What was that like, and how would you say that shaped you?
100%. Like my parents were, like I say, these kind of like typical publicans, like loved holding court, always up for a good chat, a good conversation, always up for a bit of fun, a bit of a laugh, etc. But really, like every night you were creating experiences in that pub, especially when we opened. There was a lot of music in there. It was just like the heart of the community, really. And I think that definitely did shape me and how I approach things and the way that I work with people, and that kind of fun element that I like to bring to my work and to teams, etc. But I think my parents also, outside of that, were actually quite creative people, which I think I got a bit of that from them too. So my mum loves to write poetry, for example. My dad, he was always a bit of a dreamer, but he used to love to draw, or he was a good drawer, or what have you. So I definitely got a bit of that creative side. I also think the social side, but then the entrepreneurial spirit as well.
And you talk about that in your letter, actually, this sort of marriage of creativity, but also business, and the need to have both to really fulfill your passions.
100%. Yeah. I actually do think that, like, events and creating experiences is kind of like that perfect match for me, because yes, I love the creative process. I love ideation. I love working with fellow creatives and seeing things brought to life, but it has to be effective, I think, for me. Otherwise, I kind of lose interest in it. Like if it's not driving impact in one way or another. And I think, brand experiences, as you all know, and your listeners will know, really have an opportunity to like drive real impact for businesses.
So you talk a little bit about your university days and some of the big decisions, and we've talked a little bit before coming on, that career path for you wasn't a rosy yellow brick road to Pinterest at all. So tell us a little bit about your university experience and some of the decisions you had to make that led you here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to be clear, I didn't actually end up going to university, but what I was alluding to in the letter, which is a little bit cryptic around this like decision I was making that I was kind of like regretting, it was a college course I was doing pre-university, because like I mentioned, at that age of 17, I'd left, so I hadn't finished the second year of my A-levels. So I was basically doing this kind of TV and radio journalism course in Amersham, with a view to then go on to university. And I guess I'd always thought I would do that. Then I'd probably go and do the traditional gap year traveling, and it was just kind of like what I thought I would do. All of my mates were doing it, etc. But I had left Ireland and I had moved back to England. I was living not on my own. I was living with like a shared house, etc. But I kind of like was really trying to be independent, and like I was like saying to my family, I can do this, etc. I think I was struggling with that more than I thought. And the college thing, at the time, I guess I couldn't really put my finger on it. I just wasn't loving it, honestly. I just wasn't enjoying it, and I didn't think it was that worthwhile. I I'd kind of just had this like urge that I felt like I'd rather be working, and I was also working on the side, just in a pub or what have you, and even that, I was just like, I actually would rather be there. Like, I'm getting more out of that than I feel like I am here. And then this thought of like doing this for another several years, I was just like really not into it. So over the Christmas of that year, I kind of made the decision that I wasn't going to go back. But I never really committed that was it and that was the line, that I wasn't going to go back and go to university. I was like, maybe it's just not right for now. And I kind of had that story for quite a long time that I was going to go back and do that. I was going to go back to university and maybe I'll just be a mature student or what have you. And I never did, because I fell into work, which we can get onto, and I loved it. But it definitely was something that I felt like hung over me for a long time. I felt like, am I going to regret this? Am I going to be held back because I didn't get a degree? And, you've seen the end of the letter. I no longer regret it. But I think it's like even the words, like when people would just kind of expect you to go to university, or what university did you go to, or what did you study? I used to kind of almost like feel ashamed of saying I didn't. But as I kind of grew, I suppose, in my career, what have you, I actually ended up becoming quite proud that I had got to where I had without that, taking that path, I suppose.
I completely resonate, and I think we know that we took kind of paths similar to that. I suppose for me, there's elements of it, the social side perhaps, and the connections and things that I missed. For you, when in that period of several years after, not regretting that decision, but that hangover that you mentioned, what is it about the uni thing that you thought you needed, or perhaps was the missing piece to you at the time?
I think for me, it wasn't the social piece, honestly, because I feel like I did live that part. I lived in...
Very successfully.
Yes. And lived in student houses and all of that. I think it was the validation that like someone had given you something to say that you were qualified to do that, and you had professionally been trained to do something, I suppose. That's probably what it was.
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's like, how long does it take for this phrase to come out when someone's having a conversation these days? But a bit of imposter syndrome, I suppose,
bit of a seal of approval of sorts that you can do that, or you've been kind of
absolutely
stamped that you can.
Yeah. I will say that my sister, we're really close in age and what have you. She did go to university. She was just like 1 year ahead of me in school. She was like actually the person who would constantly say to me, like, and she was going through that, she was going through the university thing, the typical thing. And she was very much like, I guess, so admiring of the path I had taken. And she was really like a champion for me and building me up and like telling me how proud she was of me, etc. So yeah, it's good to surround yourself with people like that.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel during that period, or perhaps those kind of late teens, early 20s, you mentioned kind of imposter syndrome, there was a kind of a confidence thing and a self-belief, or do you think that's just a part of that finding yourself and the career kind of that came forward?
There definitely was, and honestly, I think I still have that, to be honest. So there was that piece of it around the whole university thing, and then, I mean, like, candidly, I kind of struggled to feel like I'd express myself in a certain way, because I'd entered this world that kind of just felt very heterosexual, masculine, I suppose. And I would kind of avoid situations where I would be in a room where someone would ask me about my girlfriend or something, even though outside of work, I was like happily had a boyfriend, and like my friends knew, my family knew I was out, etc. But I kind of had this weird situation in work, especially as I got more senior, or even dealing with like senior clients or what have you, that back in the day, a lot of them used to be men in suits going to the golf club or whatever, that I would be embarrassed to say that. So that was also another kind of self-confidence thing. And that's another thing I alluded to in my letter, which was like, when you actually finally just open up and be yourself, you are just so much more. And people, of course, they accept you. And like, it even sounds ridiculous saying it now, because the world has moved on, thankfully.
But at that time, it's such a unique stage, isn't it? Those early teen years and early 20s. And for you being away from your family and in that environment, it must have taken quite a lot. So what things do you think you pulled on at that time as you were going through that journey that really helped pull you through? Because there'll be other people listening to this that may well be in the same situation.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the reality is just realizing that when you are yourself, first of all, like it always works out better and you feel better and people accept you, and actually even more because you're being more yourself, and then you've got this like less of this barrier, I suppose. So I would just encourage people to be themselves. I feel like in the working world, like Max, you might be surprised to hear this because we worked together and you probably felt like when I was working with you at Clive, I was very much myself, but I actually feel like I'm more myself now than I've ever been in the workplace. And one of the things that I ended up kind of falling into when I went to Pinterest into this like co-presidency role of like our LGBTQ community, and then like actually like publicly, I suppose, or publicly, but internally, like representing that part of me and supporting other people in the same situation in the business. And yeah, I guess it kind of like I've never felt prouder, I suppose. And then I feel just more able to express myself. I feel like my creativity is more, I can be more direct. So yeah, I would just encourage people to, find people that champion you and just try and be yourself, because people will accept you and you will be happier and do better work, I think.
Amazing.
It's tricky, isn't it? That whole kind of being yourself piece, because it's so very much around it's who you're around and feel most comfortable with. But in a commercial working environment, you kind of almost don't get to necessarily choose who that is versus your personal life instead.
Totally.
So when was it for you then that you could, because of your earlier kind of career in hospitality, Keith Prowse and so on and so forth? You mentioned in your letter, what were those kind of earlier stages like, and how did that shape you? And is there a key or pivotal moment that things clicked more so for you?
Yeah, so the Keith Prowse job was after I had just made that decision to quit college. I applied for this role. I honestly didn't even know what it meant, to be honest, what a hospitality executive was. People probably listening wouldn't know what that is either, but it was basically a sales job selling corporate hospitality packages, mostly at sporting venues, to corporates. And you were literally given the yellow pages and asked to pick up the phone and call people. And I remember the interview was like this very intense kind of like salesy interview. And then at the end of it, they were like, right, call me back tomorrow and tell me if you want the job. Maybe it wasn't tomorrow, but like in a few days or whatever. And even that was like really nerve-wracking because I didn't still really understand what the job was. I knew nothing about sport, and everyone just seemed to be like, all of the other people in this group interview were like really into rugby and football. So they were like just talking about their passion, and I was like, I don't know anything about this. But anyway, I decided to make that call, and I think that was basically part of the interview. You were kind of selling yourself back to the sales manager on reflection. But yeah, for a while I was like out of my depth here. I feel like I don't love this. I'm having to like pretend I'm into something I'm not. I know nothing about it. Hopefully no one's asked me about the offside rule. And yeah, I mean, like eventually it goes back to like the just being yourself a bit more, opening up about my personal life, or like the fact that actually that isn't a passion of mine, and saw that there were other opportunities in the role, like there were hospitality packages at the boat race or the theatre, right? So there were other opportunities that like maybe other people were not so interested in that you could get into. But then the business also had this kind of like bespoke side of their business. So they were owned by a giant catering company who owned venues, etc. And round the corner in the office there was this other team doing all of this other work that I didn't really understand. But I met this woman called Vicky Hartley, and I often credit her back to like the person who like inspired me around the events industry. And she was doing this big project for a big tech company, building this giant structure for these like couple of events, and she was just looking for help. And I put my hand up and volunteered to work on these kind of like more creative events. And that was when I was like, wow, this is a great job, and you get a chance to be really creative. It's kind of like telling a story, and then seeing it come to life. And I often say this as well, but like seeing the reaction from an audience as they walk in and like see it come to life. There's not many forms of marketing where you get like that front row seat, I think, to your work.
That's why we all do what we do.
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, because I think, but you're saying kind of that moment when at least Vicky gave you the opportunity, and that was a kind of moment where actually that was the path you thought, but equally this is suddenly kind of a slight turn, but then puts you onto this direction of kind of marketing or experiential marketing or more creative type communications. That's
right, yeah. So basically after that, a whole department I worked for shut down. I hadn't been there even a year at that stage. And personally, I was like, okay, I want to do this. Where does this type of work come from? Where does it happen? I was like, mostly it happens in London, right? I'll move to London. So I moved to London and
On your own?
Did I move at the time? My partner at the time, my boyfriend at the time, had moved. I kind of moved on my own, but then some friends also ended up moving at a very similar time. So we did end up getting a flat together. And yeah, I was just like, kind of, that was a decision. I was going to go and work in events, and I just applied for lots of jobs and used interviews as learning processes to learn more about the industry. And if I didn't get a job, I'd use the information that I got in that interview to make me sound like I knew more about events in the next job.
I think that's what people don't often realise. It's those learning opportunities you get. And I meet so many people that don't look at interviews as a two-way process. And I think it's really interesting to have that sort of approach when you were as young as you were in the industry and not knowing, and actually seeing them as a learning opportunity, an opportunity to take
100%.
lessons from.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't think I knew I was doing that at the time, but like on reflection, every interview I got a little bit better, I suppose, based on like the experience. So everything you say is absolutely right. And then, I landed at this really small agency. There was like 3 people that worked there. It was owned by a husband and wife. No longer around anymore, actually, but called Silverleaf. It was. Maybe some of the older listeners might remember it, but I was the kind of fourth person working there, and in a small agency, you just absolutely have to do everything. Yeah. I mean, if I look back at my LinkedIn, which I did to do this, like in preparation of this conversation, I was like, oh, okay, so I was an event manager, account manager, I did this, and then I was strategy. I'm like, you literally do everything. Obviously, like nowadays you'd have bigger agencies and bigger companies have real specialists in those things, but I always recommend people like start an agency. Starting a small agency, I think
agree.
is really
absolutely
great for people. Just so much exposure to everything. I think like on the first day I was taking an inquiry from some inbound call, and then like later that week I was doing a site visit at a venue I'd never been to before, but I'd turned up half an hour before and checked it out. So then I made it look like I had been there, and then I organised this event for the first time, and I just loved it. It was all about the people, though, honestly, like really just building relationships with clients, understanding what their needs are, like what their objectives are, how you're going to make them look good, and hopefully having some fun along the way.
I completely agree with your point about that, getting stuck in, and the smaller. I think there is sometimes the kind of, I say, magpie effect. It's the big shiny thing that takes you to it, and the reality is that actually, even some of the biggest agencies and organisations aren't really that good in certain respects. But I started off at I think it was a 4-person agency, because you get to know then the ins and outs of the role and what's required. So when you do progress, you get that real understanding, appreciation, and empathy at times for what those are. So I think it's a really valid point for people to
Those
be
early
open
foundations are so important, aren't they? Because you draw back on them. Even now, I talk back at my receptionist role that I had. The amount I draw on that still, 20 odd years later, it's phenomenal, isn't it? The learning curve you have.
100%.
So Seán, interesting. Some of the stuff you were talking about there, and it comes out in your letter as well, where you say, I'm going to say yes to everything, but I also learn how to say no. Funny enough, you mentioned SJ earlier. We saw that a lot in SJ as well, this sort of leaning in and saying yes to everything. And it sounds like you did that for these jobs, like going to interviews, learning more. So I'd love to know a little bit more about how you leant in and said yes, but how you learned how to say no and when to say no, because that's a challenge, I think, for most people in this industry.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I think like on the work side, saying yes, asking for opportunities as well, like back to that kind of job at the small agency Silverleaf, like I wanted it to be more than it could be, and through that pushed for opportunities to grow the business from being like a traditional agency that did a lot of kind of venue sourcing and the odd small events into like somewhere that had more of a kind of creative production department and what have you. So I mean, it sounds ridiculous saying this now, but like I literally designed a logo myself. I learned how to build a website from a book, and I launched what was called Silverleaf Productions. And we used, what our clients' briefs were to, in a creative way, to like, yes, produce these events, but also like buy all the stuff, not just hire it anymore, because I was like, this seems like a waste of money. You could definitely do this better. Like buying all the furniture, all the props, all the creative things, and then turning that into like a separate side business, which then kind of got us, because we were doing so much work in some of these like particular venues, like these venue groups were like, oh, you should be our preferred vendor. And it was like, how did this happen? Like I literally just like came up with this idea and we're doing it on our own, etc. So that is a bit of a tangent, I think. But like in terms of like saying yes to other things, I think this was touched on in some of your other interviews, and Max, I think you probably did the same thing. But going to everything, like the event industry, certainly at that stage there was always an opportunity to go to some kind of networking event, whether it's an association or it's a vendor doing something or it's a venue doing a kind of open evening or something. And like that was my social life, honestly, in my 20s. And I think I probably was out a lot of the week for probably over 10 years. And that's where I made lots of great connections. It's probably where I first met Peter Kerwood, probably at Madame Tussauds, I imagine. It's definitely where I first met Max at some kind of forum that we were at in Brighton, I think. I met some amazing people that I went on to work with, some great clients, some great vendors. And I think that whole just going to everything and building this network was like kind of part of my growth and success, I suppose, because what I was good at was solving clients' problems quickly, and that was because I knew how to put the solutions together, because I was like, oh, okay, well, you want to do that, and I'm like, well, I know that place and that person or this vendor, and like they would make a good solution. And I was able to like come up with those solutions pretty quickly because I had said yes to all of these other things and built those relationships, I think.
And that network. And did that saying yes come organically? Is that something you had to kind of proactively go, you know what, I am going to get out there, or I am going to go and do these things?
I think I just wanted to, honestly. I was like, this is so exciting. I loved it. Like, I mean, that whole time, like early 20s, most of my 20s, I still love this industry. Like, I just wanted to go to it. It was exciting. It was what I wanted to be doing in my evenings. So,
yeah. And you don't realize you're doing that at the time, per se, in terms of that whole kind of terminology of networking is grey suited and
handing out business cards furiously,
covered in cobwebs and masculine and absolutely. Whereas actually, the reality is that you meet someone for lunch there with a few other people, and you meet that is the same kind of thing, or something a bit more formalised. It's that kind of meeting people and adding value to them and helping where you can. That it's only when you look back and you think, right, this is a client problem. To your point, you need to solve it, and you think, oh, I met that person there or that venue there, and it all comes together, which is really interesting. You mentioned something just a bit earlier about Vicky, I think it was, about being a kind of a champion, if you like. I just want to ask, in terms of other individuals that of that journey, and I know that we've got a little bit less left of that journey with kind of Clive and onwards of there, but in that period over the 8, 9, 10 years or so, were there any other key people that acted as a mentor or champions that helped that process for you, or was it something that actually you found and navigated yourself quite organically?
Do you mean in those early times that we've touched on, or going on after that?
Well, I suppose kind of after that, really, that kind of from Silverleaf the next 10 years or so from that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think you won't be surprised to hear that Nick Robinson, previous owner of Clive, played a big part in my career, and I think joined Concerto at the time, as it was, and then became like a shareholder and the MD, etc. I think when he joined, he saw something in me or what, but gave me a lot of more opportunity, and pushed me outside of my comfort zone. And I think I definitely see him as a champion, and the reason that a lot of things happened in my career, I suppose, and we worked together for a long time. So he's definitely someone. There's also a amazing woman I worked with for a really short period of time, but I always remember her, and actually I really need to reach out to her again. But her name is Sarah Cox, and she joined Clive as part of the sale of the business, which happened later on, obviously. And she was like a chief people officer. She was kind of like a informal mentor in a way, and she just gave me like a lot of confidence in myself, and was one of those people that really like championed me being myself, etc. So she's someone. And then I think my current boss is actually someone that I had worked with as a client, funny enough, years before, and not like hugely directly, but I vividly remember her just being really inspiring. And what I mean by that is she was so fun and engaging and motivating for her team on site, and I really remember it. And obviously now I work with her, and she has also given me a lot of opportunity and cleared a lot of roadway for me at Pinterest to give me opportunities to shine or lead or what have you. And I definitely take inspiration from her and how I lead like my team and my part of her global team. So.
And that's something I wanted to ask you about, actually, Seán, because you say in your letter, there's a really lovely line in it that says something around, people open the door for me, be that person for other people. And you talk about that and fun quite a lot. So I'd love to know a little bit about how you lead your team and how you create that environment, because you talked about having people across multiple geographies and things like that. So how do you do that?
And I'm chucking the word of culture there as well, because it's something that I've seen you firsthand and been a part of helping with you. But yeah, would love to hear more.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. The culture piece is something I care passionately about, and it was a big part of like what we did at Clive and what we built there. And it's a really big, important part of Pinterest. But obviously, like my team is like a really small part of a bigger company, which is also part of another department, which is part of a bigger org, etc. And we are a remote team. I think I've got just one other person based in the UK on my immediate team, and then a couple of people in Dublin and like I mentioned, the US. So we don't get a chance to be together very often. In fact, even the activations that my team are leading, often they're leading it with maybe one other person on the team or a couple of other people. Like it's only really something like Cannes where we all get to be together. It doesn't happen very often, or like one kind of off-site, I suppose, a year. So how do you do that through virtual meetings? And we try to be there for each other and create a kind of like open environment. That's something that Judy, who's my boss, who I mentioned, is very good at, I guess, facilitating. Is try not to make it like feel too forced, but like reminders that every Monday morning, just like let the team know what's on your mind, or like what your priorities are, what your struggles, like what are your hurdles, etc. Or at the end of the week, like actively like letting folks know, call it rose and thorn, like what was the thing that happened this week that you're really proud of, like that you achieved, or it's kind of like your moment to like kind of like sing your own praises in a way and just let people know, because sometimes when you're working on your own and you've done a great piece of work or something, no one gets to see it. And then the thorn, like the thing that happened that was like, I really wish that didn't happen, or that was, that was shit. And I think that there's moments like that just encourage authenticity, and the team are very like supportive of each other. There's just like, obviously we have virtual meetings and what have you. How do you make them a little less formal? Like, how do you just make them conversational, giving everyone the opportunity to speak, like calling on folks who won't naturally not be someone who wants to come off mic in a bigger group and stuff like that, but just trying to like make sure everyone has that moment to speak as well.
I think in a modern day where so many of us are trying to work out what does hybrid look like, and I've also worked in an international setting where I've had teams everywhere, and it's a really interesting conundrum, and actually you're almost forced into that by the location of your team. So it's really interesting to hear how you approach that, and I'm sure there'll be some leaders in here thinking and taking some of those tips away and thinking about how they can do them.
Yes, definitely. I mean, like, I wouldn't be in this industry if I didn't say that, getting people together for actual real life things is very
That's
important.
why we do what we do.
And, we do that whenever we can. And those moments are like magic for our team. I feel like we've at this moment where we built our team back up again after the pandemic. And, over the last year, it felt like everyone was new for a while, but now it's not so much like that. Everyone's had some great projects under their belt. Everyone's kind of getting into their groove and their comfort zone, and, know each other's strengths and how to support each other. And it's actually quite an exciting time for our team. So I am actually really looking forward to Cannes and like being together.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah, Cannes. Before we start dreaming about Cannes for a second, I had one more actual question there. On the piece around the authenticity, that openness, it's almost gold dust, right, to try and create that without it being kind of natural and organic. It links into kind of the passion, and everyone's showing the same passion as well. And something else you wrote in your letter was around that kind of passion, and when it's stops being fun or passionate as to knowing when to. You mentioned kind of the saying no scenario earlier. How do you recognise, or for those that might be thinking around, okay, well, I'm enjoying it slightly actually, but maybe I've lost the passion. Can you share when, or if not that's happened for you, but how do you kind of find that kind of in tuneness? Made a new word there, but that kind of alignment to
I
kind
like
of
it.
no.
I'm there for your new word, and also thank you because Mel, I realised I didn't answer your question about saying no. So
It's all good. I was
thank you
going to come
for
back
This
to
is
it.
Yes. Saying no is something that I find difficult, if I'm honest, and I think I get it from my mother, who has always been a bit of a workaholic, but was also just always wanted to be involved in everything. And I think I get it from that. It's the honest truth. But I think what I've realised is when you say yes to everything, you just spread yourself so thin that you're not as good at all of those things. And I, recently have been in a situation like that where, a couple of really exciting global projects, they're happening at different times than they usually would, and there's this massive overlap. And I was just like, well, I definitely want to be involved in both of those and play a key role in them, because like one of them, that project feels like my baby from over the last couple of years, and this other one is so important. And just like went through honestly this month, maybe more, of just intense, like long hours, back to backs constantly for long hours, and having to skip half of the meetings for one project and then the other one, and then catch up on recordings and things like that. And yes, I was exhausted, but like mainly I just realized I wasn't doing a great job on either of them, or a job that was as good as I would want on either of them, I suppose. And then also, like, I lead a team and they need me as well, and I need to be able to show up for them and inspire them and not have them feel like I'm tired, or like that they don't want to bring me something because they know I'm busy. So I think that was a realization moment where I need to say no to things. It will definitely make you better at the other things. And then Max, you said
About the passion, about when that
yes.
It's not so much then the no, it's the recognizing when it's time to stop or change or to.
Yeah, so so that's kind of what I was alluding to there, but also there has been a big moment like that for me, and that was when I decided to leave Clive. Actually, it was a really exciting time. Like, we had just sold the business, had been there for maybe a year after that, as we'd integrated into this global group. There was this kind of like fork in the road moment where like things were needing to change, and there was a lot of opportunity. There was a lot of opportunity coming in from big clients. There was lots of new colleagues, and I think I was just like knew I didn't have the energy left in me, to be honest. I felt like in that job, I was there for a long time, like, 12 years, there were lots of these kind of step changes where like maybe the company was acquired or, merged, or it was a rebrand. So in a way it felt like lots of different jobs. And this was another one of those moments. And I was like, I need to have 100% for this. And I don't know if I have any more. I guess I felt like I had become more of a manager, I suppose. And whilst I find that part of my job rewarding, it's not all I wanted to be. I kind of think I knew I wanted to get back to like being closer to the work, opportunity to be more creative, definitely. But I also knew if I was going to do that or go into something with this like new revised energy, I probably needed a bit of a break, and I needed to find some more inspiration. So that was the moment I decided to stop, find a new adventure. And I don't think I was like ready to find another company. I couldn't imagine somewhere else I wanted to work. Honestly, I was like, I couldn't work anywhere else. I'd like put everything into
You bled, Clive, right?
exactly, into this brand. So that's when I was like, right, I'll do my gap year thing. I'll do it now. So
Yeah.
so went traveling around Central South America and got a lot of inspiration and recharged, refilled the.
Did that headspace give you the ability to kind of make your next move and decision, or did it kind of organically just fall in your lap?
It did give me the energy, although I'll be honest, I still didn't know what I necessarily wanted to do when I got back.
And the amazing thing is, as a head of global and the kind of senior roles that you have and where you've worked and things, it's that kind of realization that, in a senior position, it's okay to still not know and to kind of work that out.
Totally.
Not have the answers all the time.
I do not have the answers now. Like I couldn't tell you what the next 10, 20 years are going to look like. But yeah, it did that give me what I needed. I mean, there was something interesting that happened. I mean, it was a coincidence or fate, I don't know. But whilst I was away traveling, I kind of like, people didn't understand what the job was, to be honest. Like I'd meet people, I went traveling solo, by the way. And pretty much everyone else who was doing that was a lot younger than me.
Isn't it sobering when you sit around a table and you're having a conversation, you're like, we're the same age, and they're all 10 years younger. I've been there too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at least 10 years younger. And so like even just explaining to people, oh yeah, no, it's experiential marketing, new brand activations, etc. Like people didn't even know what that was. And I do remember, like, to go back to Cannes again, so it was the summer of 2019, and I saw on my socials or whatever, like this great video of what Pinterest had just done at Cannes Lions, and they had partnered with Yinka Ilori, this amazing artist, to create this like kind of like adult playground. Essentially, it was like bringing the world of Pinterest to life and the sense of creativity and inspiration and play to life. And I was like, that is really cool. And I remember showing it to this guy who I was traveling with, and I was like, that's what I was talking about, by the way, that's the thing. And then I was telling him about how cool it was and why I thought it was great. And then he was like, oh, well, maybe that's what you want to do. Like, they seem like a brand that you're excited about. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And then, so be it, months later, they were advertising for the role. So
amazing.
And sorry, I interrupted you there.
No,
We are coming towards the end, but we can't possibly end without talking about some of your career highs. And obviously we've mentioned Cannes a few times, and Pinterest do some incredible work at Cannes, but you've had so many iterations of your career. Like, what are some of the highs and lows along that journey?
Yeah, interesting. I guess I try to think of them as like eras almost. Yeah. So had this like kind of area, I suppose, around like 2010 maybe, where we were Concerto Live, where I was definitely felt like I was growing, and there was a lot of new opportunities, starting to do more different, diverse type of work and global work. Really started doing some consumer work for the first time, actually. A lot of the work I'd done before was B2B. Did this amazing pitch and 2-year campaign in the end for Crusher milkshakes, which was really fun, and went on to win some awards. That's definitely a highlight. We also won the Facebook account at that time. We were traveling all over the world for that. I think at one year we did like 100 events a year, and
wow,
you could be it was insane at the time, honestly. Like, you could be in New York with like a week's notice, like working on an event with Alicia Keys, and then next week you're back in London doing some global book launch with David Beckham. And I know it sounds like I'm name dropping, but like, my career has not been about doing celebrity stuff, but there was this like moment. So it does feel like quite an exciting time. And then we were just doing lots of exciting international work that Nick Robinson had brought into the business through like Honda and PlayStation. So that was one. Another highlight is definitely around 2015, 16, 17 time. That's when Max and I started working together, and that's when...
I'm not paying him for
I was going to say, Max was the highlight.
Not. No, yeah. Makes a change, doesn't it?
It was all Max. But he was part of that, definitely. Like, when we, when we went independent as an agency and like, came up with the new brand, the new identity. And I don't think we realised this at the time, but we were one of the first agencies, I think, that was doing B2B really well. And we were just having people knock on our door all the time. They loved what we were doing. We had so many opportunities. The culture, the team at that time, I just remember it. It just felt like we had it so right. There was a lot of really good memories, and like, I feel very proud of that time. And that's the time when I got promoted to the board at Clive, which was obviously a personal thing I was really proud of. And yeah, I mean, like, I feel like I had, since I've come to Pinterest, it does feel like a high. We've touched on the Cannes thing. Obviously, we won the Drum Award last year. We also had Pinterest Presents as well. So a couple of our big projects getting recognised is really exciting. And yeah, we're about to do it all over again.
Off we go. My last question before we ask the biggie. What would the Seán of 2003 say to the Seán of 2023?
Probably say, you could have warned me about what's going to happen in 2016 and 2019 in the world. And I think he would have said, I like the way we did things, actually. It was fun. Let's do those again.
Nice, brilliant. Which then brings us on to the kind of the fundamentals. So this is where, as we do and ask you in letter as well, is that ask the key one piece of advice you'd tell your younger self if only you could, and want to kind of hand that over to you to see what that would be.
Yeah, so I feel like I have got a lot of ideas for this, but the one that really sticks out to me is just say the thing. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of time people struggle to give feedback or to share what they're really thinking. And I think it holds people back, and it holds situations back and teams back and projects back. And, it's something, as I started working more of a global team and a US business, that I realized that actually us Brits are not very good sometimes at giving feedback, etc. But sometimes the kind thing to do is to actually just say the thing, like, that thing that you did in the meeting just then. I know you were trying to achieve this, but actually it made you look like this. Like, wouldn't you rather know that than just do that again for a number of years? But it goes both ways, and I think you have to be prepared to ask for someone else to say the thing. So, regularly ask for feedback. How can I get better? Is there anything I'm doing or what have you? And the reason that's top of mind is that I just read this book called Radical Candor, and it goes into that a lot. And there were so many moments in there that I was just like, yes, that moment I gave that feedback, things got better. That moment I did not do that and didn't say the thing, it was such a pain for ages. So it's kind of top of mind for me. And then just one more, because I did have a really energizing conversation with the person that I mentor through Elevate this morning, and it was really good timing. So I asked her what her piece of feedback was, and she said, just remind yourself to take the hour. Like, however stressed you are, like however deep you are in it, it's always worth just taking an hour to yourself and then coming back to it, and it's always way more achievable and not as bad as you thought. So I thought I'd share that as well, because it was a good piece of advice.
Yeah, I like that and resonate with it. Same with those emails at the last thing at night.
Oh, yes.
Worst thing to do, because or react to it quite quickly and actually not take the breather. But
100%.
I like that, the openness of feedback and being able to give, but as well as receive, and not see it as criticism, but constructive.
Absolutely.
Just say that thing.
Just say the thing.
Just say the thing. Love that.
Thank you so much, Sean. What a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
What a pleasure.
What a lovely conversation. We've both just reflected on how serene we almost feel after chatting to Sean.
It's one of those conversations you don't quite know how it's going to go, but off the back of it, feel energized, calm, it's insightful, but at the same time, you kind of have so many kind of, not similarities, but you can see parallels, if you like, and go, oh, I can really relate to that. Really relatable, I suppose, is a better way.
Yeah, it really is. And I think what's really lovely is, the way that Sean, in his reflection, obviously, I think so many of us don't realise what we're doing at the time, and it's only with the benefit of hindsight, which is why it's so lovely to get our guests to write these letters to themselves. The journey that he's been on and his approach to things, like leaning into interviews and understanding that they're learning experiences, being okay with not having all the answers, even when you've been on the board of somewhere and you're in a new role and you're learning and asking for feedback and going, how can I still be better? I guess honing your craft and being okay with growing and learning and knowing it's a continual journey, as Sean said, is like, I don't know where the next 10 years are going to be or where I'm going to be. And he's okay with that.
And there's an expectation, be it on LinkedIn or social, to have that lined up, isn't there? The other thing that I really, enjoyed of the conversation with Sean is his willingness to learn from, and I know you mentioned that, but equally trying different roles at different stages as well. So not being stuck in your channel, your river of thinking, as we kind of mentioned it in Elevate, but being open to it. So trying different things as well, and then using that to help define what your passion is, and the passion being so important to drive you. And if there's something that makes you feel there's a time to say no, recognize that, listen to your gut, I suppose, and then really kind of go with that.
Yeah, and I think so many people will get, the ability to say yes and say no is such a skill to learn. And so many event planners, and I see it in Sean, I see it in myself, and so many, we're such control freaks and we want to be involved in everything and think we can do things better. And I love that Sean was really open in recognizing and saying, there are sometimes I need to step back and let my team step forward and let them have those opportunities. And it takes, I think, real bravery sometimes to accept that, I can't do everything. And I love also Sean sharing his mentee advice, which actually came out in his own journey, stepping back, giving yourself space to think and knowing that the world isn't going to fall apart. And sometimes the best thing you can do is take a minute, take an hour, take a gap year, take time to really think about what comes next. Because I think we're all on such a hamster wheel and feel like if we don't have the next thing lined up, if we don't have the answer, something will fall apart. And actually, he's really grown in those moments where he's created space.
And his one piece of advice?
Oh, yeah, that's just a great piece of advice, isn't it? Just saying the thing, which is right, us Brits are not that great at, but it's not just saying it, it's being able to receive it. And that's a real skill, I think.
And I think that helps open up this environment for people to feel they can, that authenticity, and that helps with this company culture piece. So I think that's a really nice one to take away, and something that we should all keep in mind in our meetings, in our workspace, and even I suppose in our personal lives, is that say the thing and be open to it.
Yeah.
Elevate operates thanks to the generosity of our partners and supporters. To find out more about them, you can check them out via our website, elevateme.co. Together, we're changing lives, careers, and the events industry for the better.
This podcast was powered by Wonder, the independent specialist creative business-to-business and business-to-employee events agency. And a huge thanks goes to our producer and fellow team elevator, Pete Kerwood.